Some men reach the end of their days with nothing but dust and silence. Clint Ramsey thought he was one of them. At 69, with no family left, he bought an abandoned ranch for $1, his final refuge, where he and his stubborn donkey, Ruthie, could fade quietly into the prairie. But Ruthie uncovered something impossible beneath the barn's rotted floor, a chest filled with Spanish gold coins, artifacts and journals telling of a lost colonial treasure. Word spread fast in empty country. Soon, lawyers, treasure hunters, and armed men circled the property, each claiming rights to the fortune. What could an old cowboy with nothing to lose do with a treasure that was never his to find? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ranch sat at the end of a gravel road that hadn't seen grading in 20 years. Clint Ramsey stood in the yard, squinting against the late afternoon sun that painted the Colorado prairie in shades of amber and rust. The main house sagged to one side, like an old man favoring a bad hip. Shutters hung crooked. The porch steps had rotted through in spots, but the barn, weathered grey and listing slightly, still stood solid enough, its bones good, even if the skin was worn thin. Ruthie, his donkey, brayed from the horse trailer hitched to his pickup. She was a small Jenny, with a coat the colour of creek mud and a disposition that made mules look reasonable. Clint had bought her 6 years ago from a farmer's widow who couldn't handle her anymore. The widow had warned him, she's got opinions about everything and won't be told otherwise. That suited Clint fine. He'd never gotten along well with anything that came when called. He pulled the trailer gate open, and Ruthie trotted out, ears forward, taking in her new home with what looked like skepticism. She walked a tight circle around him, then headed straight for a patch of dried grass near the barn. Ignoring him completely. "You're welcome," Clint muttered. The auction had been held on the courthouse steps in Cedar Bend, a town whose best days were somewhere back in the Eisenhower administration. The ranch, all 40 acres of it, had belonged to a man named Vernon Tisdale, dead now 3 years with no heirs and property taxes unpaid. The county just wanted it off the books. When the auctioneer called for bids, Clint was the only person present besides a real estate lawyer who looked bored and a county clerk who looked relieved. When Clint raised his hand, $1, Clint had said. The gavel came down like punctuation at the end of a long sentence he'd paid in cash. 4 quarters, laid on the clerk's desk with a kind of ceremony that made the young woman smile despite herself. She'd filled out the paperwork, signed and stamped everything, then handed him a deed that felt both weightless and impossibly heavy in his hands. Now, standing in the yard of his dollar ranch, Clint felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not quite hope, but maybe its distant cousin. A sense that he'd bought himself a little time and space to figure out what came next. Or if anything needed to come next at all. He'd spent 40 years breaking horses on other people's ranches, most recently the Double J, outside Pueblo. Good work, honest work, but his knees had started complaining 5 years back, and his shoulder, the left one he'd dislocated twice, had a limited range of motion these days. The owner, Jim Farley, had been kind about it when they talked last spring. "You've earned your rest, Clint. Don't wear yourself down to nothing for wages." They'd shaken hands, and that was that. His trailer, a small airstream he'd towed behind him for the better part of a decade, sat now in the barn's shadow. Inside was everything he owned: a narrow bed, a 2-burner stove, some clothes, a few books, and a cigar box containing the only photographs he'd kept. Most were of Maria, his wife of 32 years, who died of cancer 7 years ago in a Pueblo hospital. Her passing had been slow and certain, the kind of thing you see coming but can't stop, like watching a storm build on the horizon. The photographs showed her at different ages, young and laughing at their wedding, her dark hair catching the light, middle-aged and squinting into the sun on some forgotten camping trip, holding a string of trout. Old and tired but still smiling, sitting in their kitchen with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. That last one was the hardest to look at. Clint kept it on top of the others, a kind of penance maybe, or maybe just because he didn't want to forget what loss looked like. They'd never had children, not for lack of trying, just one of those things that doesn't work out no matter how much you want it. After a while, they'd stopped talking about it, stopped hoping. They'd made a life anyway, a good life, he thought, traveling from ranch to ranch, working seasons, saving what they could. Maria had been a cook, one of the best, and there wasn't a ranch kitchen within 200 miles that didn't want her when they heard she was available. After she died, the world got quieter. Not peaceful, just empty. Clint kept working because he didn't know what else to do. He bought Ruthie because the silence in the evenings was unbearable, and at least a donkey made noise. Even if it was mostly complaints, he walked to the barn now, Ruthie following at a distance, still pretending independence. The big sliding door stuck when he tried to open it. The wheels rusted in their tracks. He put his shoulder into it, and the door screeched open, revealing a cavern of shadows and dust motes swirling in the slanted light. The barn was bigger than it looked from outside. 2 rows of stalls ran down either side, most with gates hanging loose or missing entirely. The hayloft above was empty, except for a few scattered bales gone to dust and mice. The floor was hard-packed dirt, swept by wind that came through gaps in the walls. It smelled of old wood and leather and time. Against the far wall stood a workbench, its surface buried under rusted tools and empty paint cans. Above it, someone had hung a collection of horseshoes, maybe for luck, though it didn't seem to have done Vernon Tisdale much good. A few saddles sat on sawhorses, their leather cracked and stiff. One looked salvageable if you knew what you were doing. Clint knew what he was doing. He walked the length of the barn, testing the floor with his weight, checking for soft spots. Near the back, Ruthie sniffed at something in the corner, probably a mouse nest, then sneezed loudly and trotted away with wounded dignity. "Careful," Clint said. "Might be something living back there. The barn had good bones. The roof was mostly sound, only a few shingles missing. The walls were thick planks, hand-cut from what he could tell, maybe 100 years old. Someone had built this place to last, back when that meant something. He spent the rest of the daylight unloading his truck. There wasn't much. The Airstream he positioned behind the barn where it had some windbreak, his toolbox, a few bales of hay for Ruthie, a cooler with enough food to last a week, and a duffel bag of clothes. He set up a camp chair in front of the Airstream and sat there as the sun went down, watching the prairie turn from gold to purple to black. Ruthie grazed nearby, occasionally lifting her head to study him with dark, intelligent eyes. She had a way of looking at him that suggested she found his life choices questionable, but was too polite to say so directly. "I know what you're thinking," Clint said. "And you're probably right." The stars came out thick and bright, undimmed by any town lights. He'd forgotten how many there were, how close they seemed out here. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light. He sat there for a long time, hands folded in his lap, thinking about nothing and everything. The wind picked up after midnight, carrying the smell of sage and distance. Somewhere out on the prairie, a coyote called. Another answered. Clint listened until they stopped, then stood slowly, his joints stiff from sitting. Inside the Airstream, he lay on the narrow bed and stared at the curved ceiling. Sleep came eventually, but it was thin and restless, full of half-formed dreams about empty rooms and roads that led nowhere. Morning arrived cold and clear. Clint made coffee on the camp stove, standing outside in his jacket while Ruthie investigated the property line. She'd already established a routine, grazing in wide circles, pausing to study interesting rocks or plants, braying at him when she felt he wasn't paying proper attention. He spent that first full day exploring what he'd bought. The house was worse inside than out. Floors warped, walls stained from roof leaks, electrical wiring that looked like a fire waiting to happen. But the foundation was solid, the framing still true. It would take work, but it could be lived in again if someone cared to try. The well still functioned, pulling up cold, clear water that tasted of minerals and stone. That alone made the dollar worthwhile. Water was life out here, always had been. By late afternoon, he'd mapped the property in his mind, where the fence line ran, where the old corral stood half-collapsed, where water collected after rain. It wasn't much, but it was his. That feeling, foreign and familiar at once, settled in his chest like something he'd misplaced years ago and only just found again. That evening, he stood in the barn doorway watching the sunset. Ruthie beside him chewing thoughtfully on a mouthful of hay. In the dying light, the prairie stretched away forever, empty and full at the same time. "We'll be all right here," he said, more to himself than to Ruthie. She snorted, which he took as agreement. Later, inside the airstream, Clint pulled out the cigar box and opened it carefully. The photographs were stacked neatly, edges worn from handling. He found the one he was looking for, Maria at their wedding, her face bright with joy. He'd been 24 then, she was 22. Neither of them had any idea what was coming, what they'd face together, what they'd lose and find along the way. He set the photograph on the small shelf above his bed where he could see it, then closed the box and put it away. Outside, the wind sang through the barn's gaps and spaces, a low note that sounded like memory. He closed his eyes and let it carry him towards sleep, Ruthie's soft breathing audible from where she'd bedded down just outside the trailer. For the first time in years, Clint Ramsey felt like he might be exactly where he belonged. The prairie darkness wrapped around them both, patient and eternal, holding its secrets close, while somewhere deep in the earth beneath the barn, treasure older than memory waited for morning light. The discovery happened on the third morning, though Clint wouldn't understand its weight until later. He'd been cleaning the barn, working from front to back with a push broom and years of patience. Dust rose in clouds that caught the light streaming through gaps in the walls. Ruthie followed him, investigating corners and sniffing at shadows, offering commentary in the form of occasional snorts and complaints. Near the back of the barn, in the space beneath the hayloft, the floor looked different. Clint had noticed it yesterday, but hadn't thought much of it. Just a section where the dirt seemed harder packed, darker. But Ruthie noticed it too, and unlike Clint, she had opinions about it. She pawed at the spot, scraping with one front hoof, then the other. Dust rose. She brayed, loud and insistent, the way she did when her water bucket was empty or when Clint was taking too long with her breakfast. "What's got into you?" Clint leaned the broom against a stall post and walked over. Ruthie pawed again, more insistent. The dirt came up in clumps, revealing something underneath that wasn't dirt at all. Wood, old wood, grey with age, and nearly the same color as the surrounding floor. But definitely wood. Clint knelt, his knees protesting. He brushed away more dirt with his hand, uncovering what looked like planks laid across something. A false floor. He'd seen them before in old barns, spaces used for storing grain or tools, keeping them dry and away from moisture that seeped up from the ground. He walked to the workbench and found a crowbar among the rusted tools. The metal was pitted but solid enough. Back at the spot, he worked the crowbar into a gap between planks and pried. The wood resisted, then gave with a crack that echoed through the barn. 3 planks came up together, revealing a cavity underneath. Darkness and the smell of earth. Clint pulled out his phone, one of the old flip kinds he'd carried for years, and used its small screen light to peer into the hole. There was something down there, something large. He removed more planks, working methodically despite the sudden hammering of his heart. Ruthie watched from a safe distance, ears forward, as if she'd done her part, and now the rest was up to him. When enough planks were removed, Clint could see it clearly. A chest. Not some flimsy box, but a massive thing. Maybe 4 feet long and 3 feet wide, bound with iron straps that had rusted to the color of dried blood. The wood was dark, some kind of hardwood that had survived however long it had been buried here. He climbed down into the cavity, his boots finding purchase on the chest itself. The space was tight. Whoever had put this here had dug the hole to fit exactly. He ran his hands over the chest's surface, feeling the grain of the wood, the texture of the iron. The weight of time. There was a lock, large and primitive, but when Clint tested it, the mechanism had rusted through. He pressed, and something inside gave with a grinding sound. The lid wasn't locked anymore, just heavy and stuck with age. He climbed out and fetched a short ladder from the barn's front. With the ladder positioned in the hole, he could get better leverage. He gripped the lid's edge and pulled. It resisted. He pulled harder, putting his back into it despite the complaints from his shoulder. The lid shifted, rose an inch, another inch. Then suddenly it gave way completely, opening with a groan, like something waking from a very long sleep. Clint steadied himself on the ladder and looked inside. Gold. That was his first thought. immediate and stunning. Gold coins, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, catching the dim light and throwing it back, transformed. They filled the chest to halfway up its depth, a fortune in metal that hadn't seen daylight in how long? 100 years more? He reached in, his hand shaking slightly, and picked up a single coin. It was heavy, solid, the weight of real gold. One side showed a coat of arms, elaborate and formal. The other side bore a cross, and what looked like a date, 1782, Spanish. He knew enough history to recognize the style. This was a Spanish colonial coin, the kind that had circulated in the Americas when this land still belonged to other empires. But there was more. Beneath the coins lay other objects. He moved the gold aside carefully, feeling like a trespasser in a tomb. His fingers found metal that wasn't gold, silver, he thought. A crucifix, heavy and ornate, worked with intricate detail. A chain to match. Religious items, probably valuable beyond just their material worth. Further down, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow survived, were books. Journals from the look of them, leather-bound and thick. He pulled one out carefully. The leather crumbled slightly at his touch. Inside, the pages were covered in handwriting, the ink faded to brown. Spanish again, he thought, though he couldn't read it. The script was old-fashioned, full of flourishes and certainty, and there was more. Small statues, coins of different metals, rings set with stones that might have been precious. A dagger with an elaborate hilt, documents that had been folded and sealed with wax that still bore the impression of some long-lost seal. Clint sat back on the ladder, the single gold coin still in his hand. His mind was moving slowly, trying to catch up with what he was seeing. This wasn't just hidden money. This was history. This was someone's life, someone's wealth, buried deliberately and left. Why? Who and how had Vernon Tisdale, who died in debt, never found this? Ruthie brayed from above, reminding him she was still there. Clint looked up at her, then down at the chest. The gold coins gleamed dully in the shadows. He turned the single coin over in his hand, feeling its weight, its age, its impossible presence here in this barn he'd bought for $1, for a long moment. He just sat there, balanced between wonder and something darker. Worry, maybe? Or the beginning of understanding that his quiet refuge had just become something else entirely. He thought about Maria. What would she have said? Probably something practical, something about getting experts involved, doing the right thing. She'd always been better at seeing the path forward when Clint got turned around, but Maria wasn't here. It was just him and Ruthie, and this chest full of impossible gold, in a barn that belonged to him now, legally and completely. He climbed out of the hole, the coin still in his hand. His legs felt weak, his mind racing through possibilities. He could cover it back up, pretend he'd never found it. He could call someone, but who? The county, a museum, a lawyer. Each option felt wrong for different reasons. Instead, he walked to the barn door and stood in the sunlight, looking out at his 40 acres of prairie. The wind moved through the grass. A hawk circled high overhead. Everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but nothing was the same at all. He opened his hand and looked at the coin again. 1782, Spain, gold. "Well," he said to Ruthie, who had followed him to the door, "I guess we've got ourselves a situation." She looked at him with her dark eyes, then turned and walked back toward her grazing spot, leaving him alone with his discovery and all the questions it carried. Clint stood there until the sun was high overhead, turning the coin over and over in his weathered hands, trying to decide what to do with a treasure that had been waiting in the darkness for longer than he'd been alive. Finally, he put the coin in his pocket, walked back to the hole, and began replacing the planks. He'd need time to think, time to figure out what was right. But for now, the secret would stay buried just a little longer, held close, like everything else he'd learned to carry alone. That night, Clint couldn't sleep. He lay in the airstream, with the gold coin on the shelf next to Maria's photograph, the two objects keeping each other company in the darkness. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the chest. The gold, the journals, all of it waiting beneath planks he'd carefully replaced, hidden again, but no longer secret. At 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep and made coffee. He sat outside despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket, watching stars wheel overhead. Ruthie was a darker shadow against the dark, her breathing steady and unconcerned. She'd found the treasure and moved on. For her, it was just another day. For Clint, it was the end of something, and the beginning of something else he couldn't name yet. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He needed to understand what he'd found before he told anyone. That meant looking at the journals, getting them translated somehow. It meant doing his homework, as Maria used to say. She'd always been the careful one, the one who thought things through. He owed her that much, to not rush, to not make foolish choices. After breakfast, he removed the planks again and climbed down with a flashlight. The gold coins caught the light and held it, but he ignored them now. They were money, that was all. Important, yes, but not the story. The journals, those might tell him something useful. He selected the one that looked most intact, wrapped still in oilcloth that had somehow kept moisture away. The others he left for now. One thing at a time. That was how you got through life when you were 69, and your body reminded you daily that it had been used hard. In the daylight, sitting at his camp chair with the journal in his lap, he unwrapped the oilcloth carefully. The fabric fell away in pieces, brittle with age. The journal underneath was leather, cracked but whole. He opened it slowly, supporting the spine. The writing inside was precise, the script ornate. Spanish, definitely. The ink had faded to brown, but was still readable, at least to someone who could read Spanish. Clint could recognize maybe a dozen words, the kind you picked up working ranches, where half the crew spoke Spanish better than English. But this was old Spanish, formal Spanish, nothing like what he'd heard around campfires and bunkhouses. He turned pages carefully, looking for anything he might understand. Dates maybe, names, numbers there, a name. Don Felipe Esteban de Cortés. It appeared several times on the first few pages, always with the same formal phrasing before and after. This was his journal, then. His record. Further down, another name, Santa Fe. Clint recognized that one. And the date. Septiembre 1782. September 1782. The same year as the coin. That couldn't be coincidence. He turned more pages. Maps, roughly drawn but detailed. Rivers, mountains, landmarks he couldn't identify. And more text, pages and pages of it, telling some story Clint couldn't read, but he knew someone who could. Tom Benally ran a feed store in Cedar Bend and had taught high school Spanish for 30 years before retiring. Clint had met him at the auction, though they hadn't spoken beyond a nod. Tom's store was small, dusty, filled with the smell of grain and leather, and Tom himself was usually behind the counter reading, novels in Spanish, newspapers from Mexico, anything he could get his hands on. Clint had shopped there once already, buying feed for Ruthie. Tom had been friendly enough, asking questions about the ranch, welcoming him to the area. Maybe he'd be willing to help with the translation. Maybe, but that meant bringing the journal to town. Meant showing someone, and once you showed someone, the secret stopped being secret. Clint sat with that thought for a long time, the journal open in his lap. The wind moved through the prairie grass. Ruthie grazed nearby, occasionally glancing his way as if checking on him. "What do you think?" he asked her. She ignored him, focused on a particularly interesting patch of weeds. Finally, he closed the journal and wrapped it back in its oilcloth. Not all the way. The fabric was too damaged, but enough to protect it. He put it in the truck's glove compartment, locked it, then stood there with his hand on the door handle trying to decide. The responsible thing was to tell someone official. Call the county, or maybe the State Historical Society. Let experts handle it. But the moment he did that, it would stop being his. Men in suits would arrive. Questions would be asked. The land might be seized, or the treasure claimed by someone with a better legal argument. He'd be left with nothing again, just him and Ruthie and 40 acres that suddenly felt less like refuge and more like burden. But keeping it secret felt wrong too. This was history, real history, someone's life story buried in the earth. It deserved better than an old cowboy hiding it under barn planks. He spent the day doing ranch work, trying to stay busy. He patched fence. He cleared brush from around the house. He organized his tools. But his mind kept circling back to the chest, to the journal, to the question of what came next. That evening he drove to town. Cedar Bend was 20 miles away, a straight shot down a county highway that cut through empty grassland. The town appeared suddenly, a cluster of buildings huddled against the prairie wind. Main Street was 6 blocks long. Half the storefronts were empty, windows dusty and dark. But the feed store's lights were still on. Tom Benelli's truck still parked out front. Clint pulled in, turned off the engine, and sat there. Through the store window, he could see Tom at the counter reading. An old man, probably 70, with white hair and skin the color of copper. He looked patient, the way people do when they've made peace with time. The journal was in the glove compartment. Clint could take it in, ask for help, see what Tom made of it. Or he could start the truck and drive home, keep the secret a little longer. He thought about Maria again. She'd tell him to ask for help. She'd always believed people were fundamentally good, that asking wasn't weakness, but wisdom. But what if Tom asked questions Clint couldn't answer? What if word spread? He sat there until Tom looked up and saw him through the window. Their eyes met. Tom raised a hand in greeting. Clint had to decide. He grabbed the journal and climbed out of the truck. The bell above the store door chimed when he entered. The smell of grain and leather wrapped around him, familiar and comforting. Tom set down his book and smiled. "Evening, Clint. What brings you by?" Clint held the wrapped journal against his chest. His heart was hammering. "I need some help," he said. "With a translation, if you've got time." Tom's eyes went to the journal, then back to Clint's face. Something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or just recognition that this wasn't a simple favor. "I've got time," Tom said. "Come on back." And just like that, the secret became shared, the burden divided, and whatever came next would no longer be Clint's alone to carry. Tom's back office was a small room lined with filing cabinets and shelves, holding agricultural manuals, feed catalogues, and books in English and Spanish. A desk sat in one corner, papers scattered across its surface in what looked like chaos, but probably had an order only Tom understood. He cleared a space and gestured for Clint to sit. "Coffee?" Tom asked. "I'm fine." Tom poured himself a cup from a pot that looked like it had been sitting there since morning, then settled into his chair with a small grunt. "So, a translation." Clint unwrapped the journal and laid it on the desk between them. Tom leaned forward, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the age of the leather, the careful script visible on the exposed pages. "May I?" he asked. Clint nodded. Tom picked up the journal with both hands, the way you'd hold something precious and fragile. He opened it carefully, supporting the spine, and began to read. His lips moved slightly as he worked through the Old Spanish, his finger tracing along lines of text. After several minutes, he looked up. "Where did you get this?" "Found it." "On my property, your ranch." Tom's expression suggested he was reassessing everything he thought he knew about Clint Ramsey. "This is Clint. This is a genuine historical document. Late 18th century, I'd guess. Colonial era. The language, the style, this is the real thing. Can you read it?" "Some of it. The Spanish is formal, archaic. I'd need time to work through it properly. But from what I'm seeing here," he turned pages, scanning. "This is a personal journal kept by someone named Don Felipe Esteban de Cortés, a Spanish official, maybe military. He's documenting a journey, supplies, distances traveled. Wait." He stopped on a page, his finger pressing against text. "This mentions Santa Fe, and something about protection, safeguarding, something valuable." Clint felt his chest tighten. "What kind of valuable?" "It would take time to translate fully, but the word here," Tom pointed. "Tesoro, that's treasure. He's writing about protecting a treasure." They sat in silence for a moment, the old journal open between them. Outside, a truck drove past, its engine noise fading into the evening. "There's more," Clint said. "Not just the journal." He'd brought the silver crucifix wrapped in a cloth. Now he unwrapped it and set it on the desk beside the journal. The silver caught the overhead light, dulled with age but still beautiful. The cross was maybe 8 inches tall, worked with intricate patterns. Vines and flowers, religious symbols Clint didn't recognize. A Christ figure hung from it, the details so fine you could see the expression of suffering on the tiny face. Tom stared at it. Then he reached out slowly and picked it up, turning it over in his hands. On the back was an inscription, words in Latin. "My God," Tom said quietly. "Clint, what exactly did you find?" So Clint told him, not everything. He didn't mention the gold coins, not yet, but enough. The chest buried beneath the barn floor. The journals, plural. The artifacts. The sense that this was something significant. Something that had been hidden deliberately and never recovered. Tom listened without interrupting. When Clint finished, the old man set the crucifix down gently and leaned back in his chair. "You know what you have to do," Tom said. "Tell someone. More than that. This isn't just valuable, it's culturally significant, historically significant. It belongs in a museum, or with the descendants of whoever buried it, or—" He stopped, thinking. The Spanish colonial period here was complicated. Settlements, missions, conflicts with indigenous peoples. If this is what I think it is, it could change our understanding of the region's history, or it could just be someone's life savings buried and forgotten. Perhaps. But that crucifix alone, Tom picked it up again. This is high-quality work. Church property, possibly, or belonging to someone of considerable wealth and standing. Combined with the journal, Clint, this is bigger than one man finding buried treasure. I know. Clint's voice was quiet. That's why I'm here. I don't know what to do with it. Don't know who to trust, Tom nodded slowly. That's wise. Once word gets out, and it will get out, you'll have every treasure hunter, lawyer, and government official within 500 miles on your doorstep. Some with legitimate claims, others just circling. So what do you suggest? First, let me translate what I can of this journal. It might tell us where the treasure came from, who it belonged to, why it was buried. That information could guide what happens next. Second, he paused, choosing words carefully. You need legal advice, real advice, from someone who specializes in property law and historical finds. Because the moment this becomes public, questions of ownership will get complicated fast. Clint had known this was coming, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I just wanted a quiet place to finish my days, I know. And I'm sorry this landed on you. But it has, and now you have to decide what to do with it. The responsible thing. The right thing. Those aren't always the same thing. No, Tom agreed. They're not. They talked for another hour. Tom made notes, jotting down questions he'd need to research. Clint agreed to let him keep the journal for a few days to work on a translation. The crucifix Clint took back. He wrapped it carefully and tucked it inside his jacket. When he left, full dark had fallen over Cedar Bend. The street was empty, most businesses closed. His truck sat alone under a streetlight, looking small and old. He climbed in, started the engine, and sat there for a moment before pulling out. Tom had said the responsible thing like it was obvious, like there was a clear path forward. But Clint had lived long enough to know that responsibility and clarity rarely kept company. The drive back to the ranch was quiet. No radio. The truck was too old for that. Just the sound of the engine and the road beneath the tires. He thought about Maria, about what she'd say if she was sitting beside him now. She'd probably agree with Tom. Do the right thing, she'd say. Let the experts handle it, but the experts would take everything. They'd excavate the barn, catalogue the treasure, cart it off to some climate-controlled archive where it would sit in boxes until someone wrote a paper about it. And Clint would be left with nothing but his 40 acres and the memory of what might have been. Was that fair? He'd bought the land legally. Everything on it, under it, was his. That was how property worked, except it wasn't that simple. It never was. When he got back to the ranch, Ruthie was waiting by the barn door. She brayed at him, annoyed that he'd been gone so long. He gave her fresh water and hay, then stood in the barn doorway looking at the spot where the planks covered the chest. Tomorrow, Tom would start translating. Soon, they'd know more about Don Felipe Esteban de Cortés and his treasure. And then decisions would have to be made. But tonight, standing in his barn with his donkey beside him, Clint felt the weight of ownership settle across his shoulders like a yoke. He'd wanted simple. He'd gotten complicated. And there was no going back to the way things were before Ruthie started pawing at that suspicious patch of dirt. He touched the crucifix through his jacket, feeling its shape. Then he walked to the airstream, locked the door behind him, and tried to sleep despite knowing he wouldn't. 3 days later, Tom called. Not on Clint's cell phone. Clint had never given him the number, but through a note left at the ranch gate. "Come to the store when you can. "I've got something." No signature needed. Clint found the note when he drove out to check the mailbox, a rusted metal thing leaning on a post at the end of his driveway. He read it twice, then drove straight to town. Tom was waiting, the journal open on his desk, along with several sheets of paper covered in neat handwriting. His face was serious, the kind of serious that meant the news wasn't simple. "I've translated about a third of it," Tom said without preamble. "Enough to understand what happened, or at least the version Don Felipe wanted to record." He handed Clint the handwritten pages. "I wrote it out in English for you, but the short version is this. Don Felipe was a treasury official for the Spanish colonial government in Santa Fe. In 1782, there were increasing conflicts with various indigenous groups and concerns about American expansion from the east. The Spanish government decided to consolidate certain valuable assets and move them to more secure locations. "The treasure," Clint said. "Yes. According to the journal, Don Felipe was entrusted with a portion of the colonial treasury. Gold coins, religious artifacts, official documents, and ordered to transport it south to El Paso del Norte, but they ran into trouble. Comanche raids, if I'm reading this correctly. His escort was killed or scattered. He was wounded, separated from the main group, and he made a decision." Tom turned pages in the journal until he found what he was looking for. "Here, there's a map, crude but detailed enough. He buried the treasure and marked the location. Look, the map was hand-drawn in ink that had faded to sepia. Rivers, mountains, distances marked in leguas, Spanish leagues. And there, in one corner, a symbol, a cross inside a circle, with an arrow pointing to text that read, "Aquí descansa el tesoro de la corona. Here rests the crown's treasure." He never retrieved it. Clint said, "The last entry in this journal is dated October 1782. He writes that his wound is infected, that he's running out of time. He asks God to forgive him for failing his duty and hopes that someone trustworthy will someday find this record and return the treasure to its rightful owners." Then the entries stop. Tom closed the journal carefully. "He died here, Clint, on this land, and the treasure has been sitting beneath that barn for 243 years. The number felt impossible. Clint tried to imagine that much time. Generations born and dying, the country changing hands, wars fought, boundaries redrawn. And through it all, Don Felipe's treasure waiting in the darkness. What happens now?" Clint asked. "That's the question. Legally, the treasure might belong to Spain or Mexico or the United States government or the state of Colorado. There are precedent cases, treasure trove law, antiquities regulations, international agreements. It's complicated, very complicated, but I own the land, you do, and that matters. But found treasure, especially treasure with historical provenance, has different rules. You'd need lawyers, probably several kinds. And once this becomes public, who else knows?" Clint's voice was sharp. "Did you tell anyone?" Tom met his eyes steadily. "No one. I told my wife I was working on a translation project, nothing more. But Clint, this can't stay secret forever. That crucifix alone, if I could identify it, so could others. And eventually, you'll need to make a choice." They sat in silence. Outside, Cedar Bend went about its quiet business, trucks passing. Doors opening and closing, the ordinary rhythm of a small town that had no idea what was being discussed in the back office of its feed store. "There's something else," Tom said. "Something I didn't mention yet." Clint waited. "The journal mentions Don Felipe had a family. A wife, a daughter, both in Santa Fe waiting for him to return. Their names are here, Maria de Cortez and a daughter named Isabel. He writes about them often, especially toward the end. About how he failed them, how they'll never know what happened to him." The name Maria hit Clint like a physical thing. His wife's name. A coincidence, nothing more, but it felt like some kind of message. "If they have descendants," Tom continued, "living descendants who could prove their connection, that could complicate ownership even further. But it might also be the right thing, to know what happened to their ancestor, to understand his story. You're saying I should find them? I'm saying it's an option. Before lawyers and governments get involved, before this becomes a circus, there might be a way to handle this quietly, honorably, in a way that respects Don Felipe's memory and his family's loss." Clint took the map, studying it. The cross in the circle, the careful notations, a man dying, trying to leave a record, hoping someone would understand and do right by his failure. How would I even start? He asked, looking for descendants of someone who died in 1782. Church records, genealogical databases. There are people who do this kind of research professionally. I know someone at the university in Boulder, an anthropology professor who specializes in Spanish colonial history. She might be willing to help discreetly, and if she asks why I'm looking, Tom considered. Tell her you found the journal, nothing else, that you're trying to understand its historical context. It's not a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either, and every person who knew was another chance for word to spread, for the secret to become public. Still, the idea appealed to Clint in a way he couldn't fully explain. Finding Maria and Isabel's descendants, telling them what happened to Don Felipe, maybe even giving them something of his, the journal perhaps, or one of the artifacts. It felt right in a way that lawyers and government claims didn't. Let me think about it, he said finally. Don't think too long. Every day this stays hidden is another day you're carrying this alone. And that's a heavy burden for one man. Tom was right. The weight of the secret had been growing since that first moment when Ruthie pawed at the floor and revealed what lay beneath. Now it felt enormous, pressing down on Clint's shoulders, filling his thoughts even when he tried to focus on other things. On the drive back, he stopped at a pullout overlooking the prairie. The sun was setting, painting the grass gold and red. He got out and stood there, the map in his hand, trying to imagine Don Felipe standing somewhere nearby 2 centuries ago, wounded and desperate, burying his charge and praying someone would find it. Well, someone had. And now that someone had to decide what to do with the prayer, sent forward through time, Clint folded the map carefully and put it in his jacket pocket next to the crucifix. 2 artifacts now, 2 pieces of Don Felipe's story. How many more were in that chest? How many pieces of his life, his duty, his failure? When he got home, Ruthie was waiting. She brayed at him, demanding dinner as if nothing had changed. And in her world, nothing had. She didn't care about treasure or history or the weight of responsibility. She cared about hay and water and the occasional patch of good grass. Clint envied her that simplicity. He fed her, then sat outside the airstream as night fell, thinking about Maria, his Maria, and what she would tell him to do. The answer came easily, because it always did when he thought of her. She'd tell him to do what helped others, even if it cost him. That was who she'd been. Maybe that was his answer. Maybe Don Felipe's treasure wasn't meant for him at all. Maybe it was meant to pass through his hands to others, to descendants who deserved to know their ancestors' story, to museums that could preserve and share it, to anyone except a lonely old cowboy who just wanted some quiet and found instead a puzzle 200 years in the making. He looked up at the stars. The same stars Don Felipe had died under, and made his decision. The man arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, driving a black SUV that looked too new and too clean for the dusty roads around Cedar Bend. Clint was working on the fence line when he saw the vehicle turn onto his property, raising a plume of dust that hung in the still air. He set down his post-hole digger and walked to meet the vehicle at the yard. Ruthie followed at a distance, ears forward, suspicious of visitors. The man who climbed out was younger than Clint by maybe 20 years, wearing jeans and a polo shirt that suggested weekend casual but cost more than Clint's entire wardrobe. He had the kind of face that smiled easily but didn't mean it. Professional, calculated. Mr. Ramsey. Clint Ramsey? The man extended his hand. Clint shook it, noting the soft palm, the manicured nails. Not a working man's hand. That's me, Rick Holloway. I'm an acquisitions specialist with Heritage Ventures. We're a company that helps people who've discovered historical artifacts navigate the often complicated process of authentication and sale. He pulled a business card from his wallet and offered it. Clint took the card, read it, then looked up. I haven't discovered any historical artifacts. No? Holloway's smile never wavered. That's interesting, because I heard differently. Word around town is you brought something into Tom Benelli's feed store. Something old. Spanish, maybe. The way he said it, casual, friendly, set off alarm bells in Clint's head. This wasn't a chance visit. Someone had talked, or someone had noticed. Don't know what you heard, but it's just gossip. Small town, people make up stories. Of course. But if there were something, hypothetically, I want you to know that Heritage Ventures has extensive experience in these matters. We work with museums, private collectors, even government agencies. We can ensure that anything of historical value is properly documented and that you, as the property owner, receive fair compensation. I'm not interested. You might change your mind. These things can get complicated fast. Legal questions, ownership disputes, tax implications. Having professional representation can make all the difference between a fortune and a legal nightmare. Clint handed the card back. I didn't ask for your help. Holloway didn't take the card. Keep it in case you change your mind. And Mr. Ramsey, I should mention that Heritage Ventures isn't the only company that knows how to follow leads. If there's something on this property worth finding, others will come. Some won't be as polite about it as I am. The threat was delivered with that same professional smile, but it was a threat nonetheless. Clint felt his jaw tighten. You're on my property without permission. I'd appreciate if you'd leave. Absolutely. Just think about what I said. Holloway climbed back into his SUV, turned around in the yard, and drove away, leaving Clint standing there with the business card in his hand and a cold feeling in his gut. Tom had said word would spread. Clint just hadn't expected it to happen this fast. That evening, he went back down into the hole beneath the barn. He'd avoided it since showing Tom the journal and crucifix, as if staying away might somehow keep the secret contained. But Holloway's visit had changed that. If people were already circling, he needed to know exactly what he was dealing with. The gold coins filled the chest's upper layer, thousands of them, by his estimate. Enough wealth to change a life, to change many lives. But it was what lay beneath the coins that caught his attention now, the personal items. The things Don Felipe had carried with him on his last journey. Clint moved coins aside carefully, feeling through the layers. His fingers found something small, oval-shaped. He pulled it out into the light, a locket. Gold, tarnished with age but still beautiful. It was maybe 2 inches long, worked with delicate scrollwork. There was a clasp, tiny and intricate. He opened it with his thumbnail, the mechanism stiff but functional. Inside were 2 miniature portraits painted on ivory. On the left, a woman, dark hair, elegant features, serious expression. On the right, a young girl, maybe 10 years old, with the same features but softer, a slight smile on her painted face, Maria and Isabel. It had to be. Don Felipe's wife and daughter, carried with him on his doomed journey, kept close to his heart. Clint stared at the portraits for a long time. They were so small, so delicate, yet they'd survived 200 years buried in darkness. The paint had faded some, but the faces were still clear, still human, still loved. He thought about Don Felipe dying somewhere on this land, the locket in his possession, or maybe buried with the treasure, meant to be returned to these women who waited for him. Had they ever learned what happened? Or had they lived and died, wondering, never knowing? The weight of those questions settled over him. This wasn't just treasure. These were lives, love stories, families torn apart by duty and circumstance and bad luck. Every item in this chest represented something personal, something meant for someone else, and now Rick Holloway wanted to help turn it into money. Others would come, he'd said. Some less polite. Clint closed the locket and climbed out of the hole, taking it with him. He replaced the planks, brushed dirt over them, made it look undisturbed. Then he walked to the airstream, with the locket held carefully in his hand. Inside, he set it on the shelf next to Maria's photograph. The 2 Marias, separated by centuries and continents, both waiting for men who couldn't come home. The parallel wasn't lost on him. He called Tom that night on his cell phone. Tom answered on the 3rd ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. Someone came by, Clint said. Heritage Ventures. Rick Holloway. Tom was quiet for a moment. I didn't tell anyone, Clint, I swear to you. I believe you. But someone saw something or heard something. Words out. What did he want? To help me sell whatever I found. Made it sound like there'd be others less friendly. There will be. Treasure hunters, mostly. The kind who don't care about history or legality, just the value. You need to be careful. Maybe install some security cameras, or I could just tell everyone the truth. That there's nothing here. After Holloway's visit, they'll never believe you now. They'll assume you're hiding something. Which you are. Clint closed his eyes. Every choice seemed to lead further into a maze with no clear exit. What about that professor you mentioned? The one at Boulder? Dr. Carmen Reyes. You want me to reach out to her? Yeah, tell her I found a journal and some artifacts. That I'm trying to understand their historical context. See if she can help track down descendants of the Cortez family. But Tom, be careful what you say. I don't want this getting bigger than it already is. I understand. I'll contact her tomorrow. After they hung up, Clint sat in the darkness of the airstream, the locket in his palm. He opened it again, looking at the two faces illuminated by the small reading light above his bed. A wife, a daughter, waiting for someone who never came home. He knew what that was like. He'd been on both sides of it, the one waiting and the one trying to get home. Maria had died over 7 years, but he still felt her absence like a physical weight some days. What would Don Felipe want him to do with this? With all of it? The journal made it clear. He'd wanted the treasure returned to its rightful owners. But who were the rightful owners after 2 centuries? Spain didn't control this territory anymore. The colonial government was long dissolved. The crown he'd served no longer had any claim, but Maria and Isabel, or their descendants, they had a claim. The claim of blood and loss and love interrupted. Outside, Ruthie brayed, probably complaining about something the way she did. Clint smiled despite himself. At least she was straightforward about her wants and needs. No complicated legacies, no ethical dilemmas, just hay and water and the occasional complaint. He closed the locket and set it beside his wife's photograph. Then he lay down, fully dressed, and tried to sleep while outside in the darkness. His 40 acres held their secrets a little less securely than they had the day before. Dr. Carmen Reyes arrived on a Thursday morning, driving a dusty sedan that looked like it had seen better days and didn't care. She was younger than Clint expected, maybe mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore jeans and a canvas jacket over a university sweatshirt, the kind of outfit that said she was more comfortable in the field than in a lecture hall. Tom had come with her, riding passenger, making introductions when Clint met them in the yard. Ruthie watched from a distance, ears swiveling, taking in the newcomers with her usual skepticism. Mr. Ramsey, this is Dr. Reyes. Carmen, this is Clint. They shook hands. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused. Working hands like his. Tom tells me you found something interesting, she said. Her voice carried a slight accent, Mexican maybe, but her English was perfect. A journal, some artifacts. Spanish colonial era, that's right. Come on, I'll show you. He led them to the airstream, where he'd laid out the journal, the crucifix, and the locket on the small table. He'd left the map there too, Tom's translation beside it. Everything except the gold coins, which stayed hidden beneath the barn floor. He still wasn't ready to reveal that part. Carmen approached the table slowly, as if the items might spook and vanish. She pulled a pair of cotton gloves from her jacket pocket and put them on before touching anything. First she picked up the journal, opening it carefully, reading the Spanish text with an ease that spoke of native fluency. Dios mío, she whispered. This is... Tom, you were right. This is Don Felipe de Cortez's hand. I'd recognize his script anywhere. Clint and Tom exchanged glances. You know his handwriting? Clint asked. Carmen set the journal down gently and looked at him. Her eyes were bright, intense. Mr. Ramsey, Clint, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told Tom when he first contacted me, but I wanted to see the artifacts first, to be sure. She took a breath. Don Felipe Esteban de Cortez was my 6 times great-grandfather. The words hung in the air like smoke. Clint felt his understanding of the situation shift, pieces rearranging themselves into a different picture entirely. I'm a direct descendant of Isabel de Cortez, Carmen continued. His daughter. The family kept records, passed down stories, though much was lost over the generations. But we always knew that Don Felipe disappeared in 1782 while transporting colonial treasury assets. We knew he died somewhere in this region. And we knew he was carrying something valuable that was never recovered. She picked up the locket, opened it, and her breath caught. That's her. That's Isabel. She did the math quickly. My great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. And that's Maria, her mother. My God, I've seen paintings based on these miniatures, but to see the originals, Tom was staring at her. Carmen, why didn't you tell me this? Because I've spent my entire academic career trying to separate my personal interest in Don Felipe's story from my professional work. I've been accused of bias, of letting family history cloud my research. So I kept it private, published under my married name, never mentioned the connection unless absolutely necessary. She looked at Clint. But this changes everything. If what I think you found is what I think it is, then my family has been searching for it for 243 years. Clint sat down slowly. Of all the scenarios he'd imagined, this hadn't been one. The treasure, he said. You know about it. I know he was carrying Crown assets. I know he buried them to protect them. What I don't know is exactly what was buried or where. The family stories say he left clues, a map maybe, but nothing was ever found. Until now, she touched the map on the table, tracing the lines with one gloved finger. This is it. This is what we've been looking for. The physical proof of what happened to him. There's more, Clint said. A lot more. He told her about the chest, about the gold coins filling it, about the other artifacts he'd seen, but not yet catalogued. He told her about Rick Holloway and his warning that others would come. He told her everything, because suddenly it felt like he was supposed to. Like this woman sitting in his cramped airstream was the person the treasure had been waiting for all along. When he finished, Carmen was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She opened it and removed something that caught the light. A ring, gold, set with a dark red stone. She held it out so Clint could see. This has been passed down through Isabel's line for 7 generations. It was her father's signet ring, or at least we always believed it was. The family crest is engraved on it. See, she tilted the ring. In the gold was carved a design, a crowned lion above a castle, the symbols of Spanish nobility. If the chest contains Don Felipe's personal effects, Carmen said, there should be a matching ring. Spanish officials of his rank typically wore 2, one for formal occasions, one for daily wear. The formal one would have been buried with him or with his official effects. Clint's heart was beating faster. You want to look? I want to see where my ancestor died, where he chose to hide what he'd been entrusted with. Yes, I want to look. They walked to the barn, all 3 of them. Ruthie followed at a distance, curious but cautious. Inside, Clint moved aside the planks, revealing the cavity and the chest below. Carmen knelt at the edge, looking down, and Clint saw tears on her cheeks. He was here, she said softly. He stood in this exact spot, dying, alone, and tried to do his duty one last time. Come on, Clint said gently. I'll help you down. They descended with the ladder, Clint going first to steady it, then helping Carmen down. Tom stayed above, shining a flashlight into the space. The chest sat as it had since Clint first found it, full of gold and history and questions. Carmen approached it the way you'd approach an altar. She knelt beside it, her hands hovering over the coins, not quite touching. May I? It's why we're here. She began moving coins aside, searching through layers. Her hands were steady, methodical. She was an archaeologist at heart, trained to document and preserve, not to grab and take. Clint respected that. It took 10 minutes. Then her hand stopped, closed around something, and pulled it free, a ring. Gold, set with a dark red stone, carved with the crowned lion and castle. She held it up next to the ring she'd brought. They were identical, matching sets separated for 2 centuries, now reunited in a dusty barn in Colorado. It's real, she whispered. It's all real. Everything my family believed, everything we passed down, it was true. She looked at Clint, and in her eyes he saw something he recognized, the weight of carrying someone else's story, the burden of memory passed down through generations. What happens now? He asked. I don't know. Legally, this is complicated. The treasure might belong to Spain, or to the United States, or to Colorado, or to you as the property owner. But morally, she held up the ring. Morally, some of this belongs to my family. Not the crown assets, maybe, but the personal effects. The journal, the locket, things that were his, meant for his family. They're yours, Clint said. The personal things. Take them, Carmen shook her head. It's not that simple. Once we report this, and we have to report it, everything will be seized as evidence. It'll be tied up in courts for years, maybe decades. Museums will fight for it. Governments will claim jurisdiction. Treasure hunters will contest ownership. So we don't report it, Clint said. Tom from above said, Clint, you can't. Why not? If the family's been looking for it for 200 years, if Carmen's the direct descendant, why shouldn't she have what belongs to her? The rest, the crown assets, the official treasure, that's different. But the personal items, those are hers by right. Carmen was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or hope. You'd do that? Risk legal trouble to give a stranger her family's history? You're not a stranger. You're the person this was meant for. He gestured at the chest, at the barn, at everything. I bought this place for $1 because I wanted peace and quiet. Instead, I found your family's story. I think that means something. She was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe the tears away. I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me figure out how to do this right. How to give your family what's theirs and handle the rest responsibly. Tom says there's legal ways, careful ways. We find them together. Carmen nodded, still clutching both rings. Together, she agreed. And in that moment, standing in a hole beneath a barn, holding pieces of a puzzle that had waited 2 centuries to be solved, Clint felt something shift. This wasn't just about treasure anymore. It was about bringing a story full circle, about giving closure to grief that had echoed through generations. It was about doing what Don Felipe had asked for in his final journal entry, finding someone trustworthy to make this right. Maybe Clint Ramsey, 69 years old, with nothing left to lose, was that person after all. They worked through the night, the 3 of them, documenting everything in the chest. Carmen had brought camera equipment, professional grade, along with archival gloves, cotton swabs, and labels. She handled each item with reverence, photographing it from multiple angles, making notes in a leather journal that looked well used. Clint had never seen anyone work with such focus. She barely spoke, just moved methodically through the chest's contents, building a catalogue of history, one artifact at a time. Tom assisted, holding lights, passing tools, occasionally reading aloud from documents they found. And there were documents, lots of them. Near the bottom of the chest, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept them surprisingly dry, were official papers bearing wax seals, the royal seal of Spain, still visible after 2 centuries. Carmen's hands trembled when she uncovered them. These are transport orders, she said, reading by flashlight. Signed by the colonial governor. They authorized Don Felipe to transport crown assets from Santa Fe to El Paso del Norte. They list everything. The gold count, the religious artifacts, even the documents themselves. This is provenance. This is proof. Proof of what? Clint asked. That this treasure isn't just random valuables someone buried. It's part of the official historical record. Spain kept meticulous accounts. These documents will match entries in colonial archives in Madrid, in Mexico City. They make everything traceable, legitimate. Tom leaned in to look. So this helps with ownership? In a way. It proves the treasure belonged to the Spanish crown, but Spain ceded this territory to the United States in 1819 under the Adams-Onis Treaty. So technically, any Spanish government assets became U.S. property. But there are international agreements about cultural heritage and... She stopped, rubbing her eyes. It's complicated. Very complicated. And these documents make it more so. They worked until dawn, started graying the sky outside the barn. By then, Carmen had photographed everything. Catalogued approximately 8,000 gold coins, dozens of artifacts, and 12 official documents along with Don Felipe's personal journal. We need to make copies, she said, sitting back on her heels. Everything. The photographs, my notes, scans of the documents. Multiple copies stored in different locations. Because once we go public with this, what if we don't go public? Clint interrupted. Carmen and Tom both looked at him. Hear me out, Clint continued. Carmen, you said your family has a claim to the personal items. Fine, take them, keep them. You've earned that. The official treasure, the crown assets, we report those. We follow proper channels, contact the state, let the lawyers sort it out. But we do it on our terms, with documentation, with a clear record of everything. We control the narrative. The state will want to excavate, Tom said. Archaeologists, officials, they'll tear up your property. Let them. I don't care about the land. But I want Carmen's family to get what's theirs, and I want Don Felipe's story told properly. Not sensationalized, not turned into some treasure hunt reality show. With respect. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. There's another problem. Rick Holloway. He knows something's here, and if he's watching, which I assume he is, he'll see that I've been here. He'll put things together. We might not have much time before this gets out of hand. As if summoned by his name, they heard vehicles approaching. Multiple engines moving fast. Clint climbed the ladder and looked out the barn door. 2 trucks and an SUV were coming up his driveway, raising dust. We've got company, he said. They emerged from the barn as the vehicles pulled into the yard. Rick Holloway got out of the SUV, accompanied by 2 men who looked like they'd be more comfortable breaking bones than shaking hands. From the trucks came 4 more people, 3 men and a woman, all wearing utility clothes and carrying metal detectors. Ruthie, sensing trouble, trotted behind Clint and stayed close. "Mr. Ramsey," Holloway called out, that professional smile in place. "Good to see you again. And Tom, Dr. Reyes, what a surprise to find you all here so early. Must be something interesting going on. You're trespassing," Clint said. "All of you, leave. Now that's not very neighborly. We're just here to help. You see, I did some research after our last conversation. Turns out Vernon Tisdale, the previous owner of this property, had some gambling debts before he died. Those debts were never paid, and the people he owed money to, well, they have a legitimate claim to any assets found on this land." "That's not how it works," Tom said. "The debts died with him. The county seized the property and sold it free and clear. That's one interpretation. My clients have another, and they're willing to go to court over it." Holloway gestured to the people with metal detectors. "In the meantime, we'd like permission to conduct a survey of the property, just to see if there's anything worth disputing." Permission denied. "Get out!" One of Holloway's enforcers stepped forward. He was big, thick through the shoulders, with a face that had seen a few fights. "Maybe we don't need permission. Maybe we just take a look around anyway." Carmen moved to stand beside Clint. "I'm Dr. Carmen Reyes, University of Colorado. This site has potential archaeological significance. Any disturbance without proper permits is a federal crime under the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. I've already filed preliminary paperwork claiming this as a protected site." Holloway's smile faltered. "You filed when?" "Yesterday. As soon as I confirmed there were colonial-era artifacts present. So unless you want to deal with federal charges, I suggest you leave now." It was a bluff. Carmen had told them she hadn't filed anything. But she delivered it with such confidence that even Clint almost believed her. Holloway studied them for a long moment, calculating. Then he shrugged. "Fine, we'll leave. But Mr. Ramsey, you should know word's out. By tomorrow, you'll have every treasure hunter in 3 states converging on this property. And some of them won't be as polite as me. You might want to reconsider my offer. Professional protection, legal representation, proper security. Think about it." He climbed back into his SUV. The others loaded into their vehicles, some reluctantly, and the caravan drove away. But Clint noticed that one truck stopped at the end of his driveway, parking on the public road, watching. "They're not going away," Tom said. "No," Carmen agreed. "They're not. And I wasn't bluffing about filing the paperwork. I need to actually do that now, today. But it'll take time to process, and until then we're sitting ducks," Clint finished. He looked at the barn, thinking about what lay beneath its floor. 8,000 gold coins, priceless artifacts, documents that could rewrite part of colonial history. All of it protected by nothing more than old wood and one old man with a stubborn donkey. "We need a plan," he said. They went back to the Airstream. Carmen opened her laptop and started typing rapidly, filling out digital forms for the Archaeological Resources Protection Act filing. Tom called a lawyer he knew in Denver, someone who specialized in property law and historical finds. And Clint sat and thought. The treasure couldn't stay hidden. That was clear now. Too many people suspected. Too many interests were circling. But how it came to light mattered. Who controlled that moment mattered. He thought about Don Felipe, dying on this land, with his duty unfulfilled. He thought about Maria and Isabel, waiting for a husband and father who never returned. He thought about Carmen, carrying her family's grief through 7 generations. And he thought about his own Maria, who'd always told him to do what helped others, even when it cost him something. An idea formed. Risky, maybe foolish, but it felt right. "Carmen," he said, "how long would it take you to move the personal items? The journal, the locket, the ring, anything that was Don Felipe's privately." She looked up from her laptop. "An hour, maybe 2. Why?" "Because I think we separate things. Tonight you take the personal items. Quietly, carefully, no one sees. They go with you to Boulder, into university archives, protected. Your family's heritage preserved. Tomorrow morning I call the state. I tell them I found Spanish colonial crown assets on my property. I show them the official documents, the photographs you took. I do it by the book publicly, so it can't be buried or stolen." "And the gold?" Tom asked. "The gold gets counted, catalogued, turned over to whoever has legal claim." "I don't want it. Never did, Clint. That treasure's worth millions. I could die rich and alone, or I could do something that matters. I choose the second." Carmen was staring at him. "You'd really do this?" "Give up any claim to your share." "What share?" "I paid $1 for 40 acres. Everything else is extra. But doing it right, helping you get your family's story back, making sure Don Felipe's final wish gets honored, that's worth more than gold." The room was quiet, except for the hum of Carmen's laptop. Outside, the sun was fully up now, bright and warm. Ruthie brayed, demanding her breakfast. Life continued, ordinary and extraordinary, all at once. "Okay," Carmen said finally. "Okay, tonight we do it your way. But Clint, if this goes wrong, if they catch us moving artifacts before the official claim is filed, then it goes wrong. But at least we tried to do it right." Tom stood. "I'll help. We'll need boxes, packing material. And we should move your truck behind the barn, out of sight from the road. If they're watching, Clint said. "So we act normal. You two leave now in Carmen's car, like you're heading back to town. Come back after dark. Park a mile away and walk in. Meanwhile, I go about my business like this is just another day." They worked out the details. Meeting time, approach route, what to pack first. Carmen would bring proper archival boxes and materials. Tom would bring his truck parked safely away to transport everything. They'd work fast, be gone by midnight. It was a plan built on hope and improvisation, the kind that could fall apart at any moment. But it was their plan, made with good intentions and respect for history. And sometimes, Clint thought, that had to be enough. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Clint worked around the property, repairing fence, moving hay, doing everything he normally would. The truck parked at the end of his driveway didn't move. Twice, other vehicles drove by slowly, their occupants studying his land. Word was spreading, just as Holloway had promised. Carmen and Tom left mid-morning in her car, making no effort to hide their departure. Clint watched them go, knowing they'd be back after dark. Until then, he had to act like nothing unusual was happening. Ruthie seemed to sense his tension. She stayed closer than usual, following him from task to task, occasionally pressing her muzzle against his shoulder in what might have been reassurance. He scratched her ears absently, grateful for the company. "Just you and me holding down the fort," he told her. Like always, evening came slowly, the sun taking its time, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Clint made dinner in the Airstream, beans and cornbread, simple and filling, then sat outside watching the sky darken. The truck at the end of the driveway had been replaced by a different vehicle, same purpose. They were watching in shifts now, professional. At 10:30 his phone buzzed, a text from Tom. "In position." Clint waited 15 minutes, then walked to the barn as if doing a final check before bed. He turned on no lights, moved through the darkness by memory and moonlight. Inside, he removed the planks from the floor one last time. 2 shadows appeared at the barn door. Carmen and Tom, both dressed in dark clothes, carrying empty backpacks and archival boxes. They moved quickly and quietly, practiced in their silence. "Any trouble?" Clint whispered. "Clear so far," Tom replied. They descended into the cavity, with flashlights covered with red filters to preserve night vision. Carmen had a checklist, items she'd identified as Don Felipe's personal effects rather than crown property. She worked through it methodically. The locket, the matching signet ring, personal correspondence, a small religious medal, a knife with his initials carved in the handle. "There," she said, pointing. "That leather case." Clint pulled it out carefully. It was small, maybe 5 inches square, the leather cracked but intact. He handed it to Carmen, who opened it with reverent care. Inside was a prayer book, handwritten in Spanish. The pages were vellum, thin as tissue, covered in the same script as the journal. But this was more intimate. Prayers, personal reflections, verses copied out by hand. On the inside cover was an inscription, "Para mi amado esposo con todo mi amor, Maria, for my beloved husband with all my love, Maria." His wife gave him this, Carmen whispered. He carried it with him. Her voice broke. She closed the prayer book gently and held it against her chest. They packed everything carefully, each item wrapped and cushioned. The work took longer than planned. There were more personal effects than Carmen had anticipated. A pocket watch, letters, a small portrait of Don Felipe himself painted on copper. Each one a piece of someone's life, carried on a doomed journey. "That's everything on the list," Carmen said finally. "We should go." They were climbing the ladder when they heard it, vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, moving fast without headlights. Clint's heart hammered. He looked at Tom and Carmen, saw his own fear reflected in their faces. "Go," he said. "Out the back." "I'll stall them, Clint, go!" Carmen and Tom ran for the barn's rear door, carrying the boxes between them. Clint climbed out of the cavity and moved to the front entrance just as 3 trucks roared into his yard, their headlights flooding everything with harsh white light. Men poured out, 8, maybe 10, all carrying flashlights and tools. Rick Holloway wasn't among them. These were the less polite types he'd warned about. Treasure hunters, the real kind, the ones who didn't care about laws or history, just the value of gold. "Evening," Clint said, stepping into the barn doorway. His voice was steady despite his pounding heart. "You boys are trespassing." The nearest man, 40-ish, beard, cold eyes, laughed. "Old man, step aside. We know it's here. We're taking what's ours." "Nothing here is yours." "Then you won't mind if we look." They pushed past him into the barn. Clint let them, had no choice. He counted seconds in his head, giving Carmen and Tom time to disappear into the darkness. 30 seconds, 45, a minute. The men found the exposed cavity immediately. One shone a light down and whooped. "There, I told you." They scrambled down, 4 of them crowding into the space. Clint heard their excited voices, the scrape of metal on metal as they poured through the chest. Let them find the gold. Let them think that was everything. Just let Carmen get away with what really mattered. But then another man, standing at the barn's rear, called out, "Hey!" Someone's running out back. They've got boxes. Everything exploded into chaos. 3 men broke away from the barn, running toward where Carmen and Tom had disappeared into the darkness. Clint moved without thinking, grabbing a shovel from the barn wall and stepping into their path. "That's far enough," he said. The lead man barely slowed. He was bigger than Clint, younger, and had momentum. The collision should have ended with Clint on the ground. But 69 years of ranch work had left Clint with a low center of gravity and the kind of stubborn strength that doesn't quit when you need it. He braced, twisted, and used the man's momentum against him. The man went down hard. The other 2 stopped, reassessing. One pulled out a knife. The blade caught the moonlight. Then Ruthie entered the situation. She came from nowhere, a small, furious donkey with her ears pinned back and her teeth bared. She charged the man with the knife, braying loud enough to wake the dead. The man stumbled backward, more startled than afraid, but it was enough. Ruthie followed up by kicking with both hind legs, missing him, but sending a clear message about her intentions. "What the—" Sirens cut through the night. Distant but approaching fast. Red and blue lights appeared on the county road. Multiple vehicles converging on the property. The men froze. The one Clint had dropped scrambled to his feet. "Cops, let's go!" They ran for their trucks, the ones who'd been in the barn, climbing out and following. Engines roared to life. The trucks tore out of the yard, fishtailing on the gravel, desperate to leave before law enforcement arrived. Clint stood there, breathing hard, the shovel still in his hands. Ruthie trotted over and pressed her nose against his leg, snorting. "Good girl," he managed. "Very good girl." The sheriff's vehicles, 3 of them, pulled into the yard. Deputies emerged with hands on their weapons, taking in the scene. Then Sheriff Kate Morrison herself stepped out, a woman in her 50s, with grey hair and eyes that had seen everything small-town crime could offer. "Clint Ramsey," she called. "That's me. We got a call from Dr. Carmen Reyes about 30 minutes ago. Said you might need assistance with trespassers attempting to loot a historical site." She looked at the barn, at Clint, at Ruthie. "Looks like she was right. They ran off. 3 trucks heading south. My deputies will catch them. Now you want to tell me what's really going on here?" Carmen and Tom emerged from the darkness, still carrying their boxes. Carmen was slightly out of breath but composed. "Sheriff Morrison? I'm Dr. Reyes. Thank you for responding so quickly. Doctor, you want to explain why I'm chasing treasure hunters at 11 at night?" So they told her. Not everything, but enough. About the chest, about Don Felipe, about the documents proving this was an official Spanish colonial site. Carmen opened one of the boxes and carefully removed the royal documents, showing the sheriff the wax seals, the official stamps. Morrison studied them with a flashlight, her expression unreadable. "These are real, authenticated through photographic analysis and historical records," Carmen said. "This site contains significant archaeological and historical materials. I filed preliminary protection paperwork this afternoon. It's a federal matter now. Convenient timing. Sheriff, I called you because I knew there would be trouble. These people have been circling Mr. Ramsey's property for days. We needed law enforcement present when we secured the personal artifacts for transport to university archives. The Crown assets remain on site for official processing. It was a careful dance of truth and omission. Morrison clearly knew there was more to the story, but the documents in her hand were real, and Carmen's credentials were legitimate. "All right," Morrison said finally. "Here's how this goes. I post deputies on this property tonight. Tomorrow morning, we contact the State Archaeological Board and get proper procedures started. Dr. Reyes, those boxes get inventoried before they leave my jurisdiction. Mr. Ramsey, you don't touch anything else in that barn. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Clint said. "And somebody needs to tell me how a 69-year-old man and a donkey held off 10 treasure hunters. Didn't hold them off. Just slowed them down until you arrived." Morrison almost smiled. "That's one hell of a donkey." The rest of the night was spent giving statements, documenting the scene, waiting for more deputies to arrive. Carmen inventoried the box's contents with Morrison watching, recording everything on official forms. The personal artifacts would go to university archives, held in trust pending final determination of ownership. It wasn't perfect, but it was legal. By dawn, deputies were posted at the property entrance and in the barn. The cavity was sealed with official tape. Carmen and Tom prepared to leave. The boxes loaded into Morrison's own vehicle for transport to Boulder under official escort. Clint walked Carmen to the sheriff's car. She looked exhausted but relieved. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For understanding what this meant. You gave Don Felipe's story an ending," Clint replied. "That's worth something." She hugged him suddenly, briefly, then climbed into the car. Morrison started the engine, and Clint watched them drive away, carrying 2 centuries of grief toward whatever peace could be found. The sun was coming up. Ruthie stood beside him, chewing thoughtfully on a mouthful of hay she'd stolen from somewhere. The prairie stretched away in all directions, golden in the early light. "Well," Clint said to her. "That was a night." She snorted her agreement, and together they walked back to wait for whatever came next. 6 months later, Clint stood in the same barn doorway, watching the prairie turn gold in the afternoon light. The cavity beneath the floor had been properly excavated by state archaeologists, documented and photographed and emptied. The gold coins, all 8,217 of them, had been counted, catalogued, and removed to secure storage in Denver, while lawyers and governments argued over ownership. The official documents had been authenticated by experts in Spain and Mexico. Don Felipe Esteban de Cortez's final journey was now part of the historical record. The barn felt different now, empty of secrets. Just a barn again, weathered and old but honest about what it held. Ruthie wandered over from her grazing spot and nudged him with her nose. She'd become something of a minor celebrity after news outlets picked up the story. A heroic donkey defends historical treasure, and Clint had received offers to sell her for amounts that made him laugh out loud, as if he'd ever let her go. "You're staying right here," he told her, scratching between her ears. "Even if they offered me $1 million, she snorted, clearly unimpressed with hypothetical millions. His phone rang, Carmen's name on the screen. He answered, wedging the phone between his shoulder and ear while he worked on untangling a lead rope. "Clint, I have news. The university's press office is making an announcement tomorrow. The Spanish government has formally acknowledged the treasure as part of their colonial heritage, but they're not claiming ownership. They've agreed to let it be split between the University of Colorado for research and preservation and the State Historical Society. A portion will be used to fund Native American cultural preservation programs, recognition that the colonial period affected indigenous peoples most of all." "That's good," Clint said. "That's right. And there's more. The courts ruled that as the property owner who discovered and reported the find, you're entitled to 10% of the treasure's appraised value. That's approximately $2 million, Clint." He stopped working on the rope. $2 million. He tried to imagine what that meant, what it would change. Then he thought about what he'd told Carmen that night in the barn. He'd choose doing something that mattered over dying rich and alone. "What about Don Felipe's personal effects?" he asked. "The things your family should have." The judge agreed, their family heritage. "The university holds them in trust. But my family, Isabel's descendants, we're the official custodians. We can visit them, study them, share them. It's more than we ever hoped for." "Good. That's what matters." There was a pause. Then Carmen said, "Clint, what are you going to do with $2 million? "Don't know yet. Don't need to decide today." But he'd been thinking about it. Thinking about Maria, about legacies, about what you left behind when you were done. $2 million could do a lot of good if you let it. Fund scholarships, maybe. Support historical preservation. Help people who needed it. "Listen," Carmen said. "I'm coming through Cedar Bend next week. University business. Can I stop by?" Doors always open. When she arrived the following Tuesday, she brought a package wrapped in brown paper. They sat outside the Airstream in camp chairs while Ruthie grazed nearby, and the prairie wind sang its eternal song. "This is for you," Carmen said, handing him the package. "From my family. All of us." Inside was a book. Leather-bound, beautiful, the pages thick and creamy. On the cover, embossed in gold, "The Journey of Don Felipe Esteban de Cortez, a Family History." Clint opened it carefully. The first pages showed photographs of the artifacts, the locket, the rings, the prayer book. Then came genealogical charts showing Isabel's line down through 7 generations to Carmen. Then came the translation of Don Felipe's journal, complete and annotated, maps, historical context, letters from family members across the centuries, all seeking news of the man who'd disappeared, and in the back, a new section, The Discovery. It told the story of how Clint found the treasure, how he chose to do the right thing, how he helped a family find closure after 200 years. "We wanted you to have this," Carmen said. "You're part of the story now. Part of our family's story." Clint turned pages, seeing his own name in print, reading about how he'd bought a ranch for $1 and found something worth more than money. His eyes stung a little. He blinked it away. "Thank you," he managed. They talked for a long time that afternoon. About the continuing legal proceedings, about the museum exhibit being planned, about Carmen's work documenting other Spanish colonial sites. But mostly they talked about simpler things. Ranching, family, life, as the sun started its descent, painting everything in warm light. Carmen stood to leave. "You did a good thing, Clint. Don Felipe would be grateful. Just tried to do what was right. Seemed like what Maria would have wanted, your wife." "Yeah, she always knew the right path better than I did." After Carmen left, Clint sat with the book in his lap, watching the day fade. He thought about Don Felipe dying on this land, trying to fulfill his duty to the end. He thought about Maria and Isabel waiting in Santa Fe for someone who never came home. He thought about Carmen carrying that grief through generations, until finally there was an answer. And he thought about his own Maria, who'd told him that helping others was worth more than gold, who'd believed people were fundamentally good if you gave them a chance. She'd been right. He'd found treasure, yes, but the real find was simpler, the chance to do something meaningful, to bring a story full circle, to prove that even at 69, with nothing left to prove, you could still matter. The prairie darkened. Stars emerged thick and bright. Ruthie came to stand beside him, her warmth a comfort in the cooling evening. "We did all right," Clint said to her. "To Maria's memory, to the ghosts of this land, we did all right." And in the vast quiet of the Colorado prairie, with 40 acres of land bought for $1 and a fortune in gold, returned to history, Clint Ramsey finally felt he'd found what he'd been looking for all along. Not peace, exactly, but purpose. Not an ending, but the kind of beginning that comes disguised as something else. He stood, stretched his stiff joints, and walked to the airstream with Ruthie following. Tomorrow would bring its own concerns. But tonight he had enough. More than enough. He had done what mattered. And that, in the end, was the greatest treasure of all.